pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Patty, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Frank Baker.
Present.
Councilmember Leslie Otero.
Here.
Councilmember Lloyd Roberts.
Here.
Councilmember Joe Shirley.
Here.
Councilmember Mike Zabel.
Here.
Vice Mayor Glenn Dunn.
Here.
Mayor Dave Davis.
Here.
And interim city manager Kyle Reed.
Here. Thank you, Patty. All right, we have one item on the agenda tonight, and that is to have a discussion and review the city budget and how it aligns with the city's strategic plan. It says to bring your budget and strategic plan. I specifically, whenever I made this request, I knew that Glenn Gunn, Vice Mayor Gunn, was far more experienced with this particular topic. So I requested that he present the meeting. And so without any further delay, take it away, Vice Mayor Gunn.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties here. There's been a huge amount of time allotted for this, and that is not my goal tonight. The goal of tonight's presentation, and it will be a little bit lengthy, but I hope to fly through it and be done with it. And the goal of it is to just baseline everybody with the strategic plan, so why we're doing this. It's Microsoft back in the early 2000s, they did an infographic, and they said, in the early 2000s, the human attention span dropped from 12 seconds to 8 seconds. That was the bad news, but it got even worse because they said that the attention span of a goldfish is 9 seconds. So I put together a magic lantern show here so we can hopefully keep you engaged on some of this stuff. At any time you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I will try to engage some of you by asking questions, okay? Because what we need to do is try to baseline how everybody thinks about certain things, especially the budget and how we're going to approach issues within the city. It doesn't mean we're all always going to come to the same conclusion or that we're always going to vote the same way or whatever. That's a given. Hey, when we walk out here, we're all big boys and big girls, and that's the way we do business. You say your words, you have your moment, you try to convince the other people. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And we move on to the next issue. So that's where we're at here. This is the strategic plan. Originally, it came about in 2019, and there was pushback from the existing council then. They didn't understand it. They didn't know why we wanted to do it. They said that the annual fiscal plan review covered everything, the planning and zoning, help me out, what's the? Comprehensive plan covered everything. We didn't need a strategic plan. Not quite sure why that was that way, but we pushed it through. It should be noted here that Lynn Reeves and I worked closely with using the strategic plan. Many of the updates you're about to see took place as late as March and May of this year. This briefing was actually initiated back in the March time frame between Lynn and I in preparation to get the new council up to speed and also to incorporate their new ideas in their agenda. Adjusting today from updating, we're not going to do any of that. All we're going to do today is I'm going to do a quick review of this thing, and we're going to emphasize the budget process in this thing. So we should be able to speed through this thing. We're not going to be reinventing goals or priorities or whatever. We're just going to kind of review how some of this stuff came about and baseline this so that we can just move forward with the existing budget. We're not trying to spend a lot of time. We would need another day, possibly a couple days, to actually build new goals and priorities. So where I'm going to start, I'm going to start at the end of this thing. If you were to go through all of the slides in the initial presentation, the next thing would be the very end. But we're going to go ahead and streamline today's process, so we're going to jump kind of to the end of this thing. And so again, back as early as March timeframe, Lynn Reeves and I sat down and we tried to put new objectives to the strategic plan. And one of them was, after the March 2022 installation of the new council, we were going to devote a work session to review and update this thing, because we were well aware that the new council would be bringing their own personal agendas. They had new, fresh ideas, and we wanted to incorporate that and capture all of that. But again, we're not dealing with updates today. We're just going to emphasize the budget process. Okay. The strategic plan. Why is it? This is a list, a laundry list of stuff that the strategic plan is supposed to accomplish for us. Okay. But the thing to note here is, at the end of the day, it's about making smart, business-like decisions and prioritizing limited resources. But there's a couple other things in this list we need to walk away with. Okay. One is, it's a shared vision. We all have a common baseline of how we think about the priorities, what the issues are within Bel Air Beach, and how we're going to address those things. We want a common shared vision of how we're going to approach this stuff. And lastly, it institutionalizes a process. We never had a strategic plan before. This is capturing it, because we're not here. Bel Air Beach was here before us. It's going to be here long after us. And it provides continuity so that as the staff changes out, as the council members change out, this thing is frozen in how we do business. Okay. Any questions about any of that so far?
Is this the first time that you've ran the strategic plan as part of a budget process?
That's a good question. And I'll flash up the chronology of this thing, okay? So the original thing was signed in 2019. And no, it had never really been reviewed beforehand. And I'll get through some of the timeline on this thing. We've kind of gone through the motions. We made a quick, like literally 30 minutes, we ran through it. Does this make sense? Okay? We checked the blog saying, hey, review strategic plan before budget process. But has there ever really been any in-depth going back, reviewing the assumptions, reviewing the strengths and weaknesses on that stuff?
Vice Mayor, I'm going to add to that. Last 3 years were loaded with distractions. Distractions eat up time. Unfortunately, at the beginning of this term, we started off with a lot of distractions. City manager, city attorney, budget, all these things are coming up. So it may have been intentional 3 years ago, for the last 3 years, but it certainly is not now.
No.
I think, in fact, once it came in new just now, most of them were discussed in the strategic plan, or in the track. So the timing is perfect.
If you look at this history of the strategic plan, what you're going to see is there are some huge gaps from when it was implemented in 2019, and then we went through a council where nothing was done with this thing. I mean, we gave it lip service, and one of the things that really prompted enacting this thing as the original council went out in 2018, 2019, was your predecessor wanted to put a complete stop to the strategic plan. And yet, he did nothing. Your predecessor did nothing about the strategic plan. So, looking back, 2020 hindsight, it was fortuitous that the outgoing council ahead of him actually enacted something. Otherwise, we would have nothing. So there were some big gaps in there.
On the previous slide, you had said it provides continuity. And then you said as leadership and staff change. So when that happens, when leadership and staff changes, obviously the whole strategic plan could change right then.
Well, the way I envision this works is you, by resolution, adopt a strategic plan, okay? And that's in effect for the city. If the entire council was to get wiped out on a bus trip down to the county, the incoming would still have a strategic plan.
Sure.
Now, they can go in and change it. Hey,
Right.
What were these knuckleheads thinking of when they gave us these priorities?
Right.
But, and I'll get to that a little bit later on, the original intent of this thing, and if you look at the original document, the intent was for this thing to be reviewed on an annual basis. Well, what happened was, we just went through a charter review lately, that was yanked to just on a frequent basis or recurring basis.
Where's the requirement? I couldn't find anything in the ordinance for us to follow this. Because as you said, it was adopted in 19, put together in 18. I brought up at the last work session about safety and strategic plan, and you said, what haven't we followed that? So, is this more minutiae, like just going through this exercise tonight, and when we don't feel like, because I've dealt with so many agencies with strategic plans, and they use it at their benefit, and they don't follow it, is what I'm saying. And a lot of these things, I think, would have been better used in the 2021 toilet paper crisis.
Well, I think you've got a good point, and it points out a weakness in this whole thing, and the mentality is, you're dealing with a family of plans here, because what you're going to see is, the strategic plan is a foundation for things like the capital improvement plan, the budget process, and all of that, and it ties in, and it's kind of an intuitive linkage, and maybe some people can't connect the dots on that thing. If you look for the emphasis on using this, it's actually in the strategic plan document. And you're right, maybe one of the follow-on things, one of the next things we have to do is you have to put some legitimacy behind this thing. And didn't we just do that in the last charter review? I thought we said we incorporated the strategic plan in there.
It may be incorporated, but where's the mandatory requirement to follow it?
The charter.
The charter.
The city charter says you will basically conduct business according to the strategic plan.
I understand, but then all council meetings prior that we haven't followed it, they all.
No, I think because the commitment was there. We have this thing, let's use it as a guideline for how we think about stuff. Are we tied to it? Absolutely. Well, I think we're tied to it now more than we were a couple of years ago, because during the last charter review, verbiage was added to the charter to say, hey, you've got a strategic plan, use it, and also it will be updated on this frequency.
Can I just add that I generally keep a copy of it in my binder if I have a hard copy that I bring it with me. I have it open before the meeting, almost every meeting. I review it constantly because there are some gentle reminders of how we're supposed to be doing business. So, I mean, that it is a guideline for us to follow. I'm not sure why someone would think it isn't.
Well, yeah, and I guess what I'm seeing here is, and that's a good question, so the question of why this thing hasn't been adopted and embraced the way I think it was meant to be was because, and here's the question for you, is it indicative of a lack of commitment or a lack of understanding of the significance?
Well, it's a 12-page document, and I think it's too hard to read. I mean, too hard to accept. It's just
Okay, the original 2019 was a very thin document, but what you're going to see is that's
the one active right now is 2019 and 2024, correct?
that's all we have, yes.
Okay, so that's the one I'm talking about.
But if you'll give me a little more time, I'll show you how and who has been using it. Because while I'm detecting some pushback and some lack of visibility on what this thing has done and accomplished for us, I think I'm going to bring that out, and hopefully you'll kind of understand the value of this. Maybe not. Okay. So a follow-on question is there's a huge gap here where nothing was ever done with the strategic plan. Some people understand it and embrace it. Other people don't care. The initial review from the 2018-2019 was, really, what value is it? Well, if you study Fortune 500 companies, it's a best practice embraced by successful companies and businesses. So the question is, will that be the same legacy for this council? Hey, inaction on the strategic plan, forget it, we've seen it, it's not doing anything. I don't know. So, this was the initial 2019 document. It was a very, very thin document. And I'm just going to kind of run through this thing. There was a 2025 draft that was never fully adopted. We've given it a lot of lip service. People like talking about strategic plans. As a matter of fact, people in their campaign speeches, I've listened to them on the internet during Meet the Council night, and guess what? Oh, they talk about strategic plans. They give it a lot of lip service because it's the buzzword of the day. But when it comes to actually using it and knowing how to employ it, hey, I don't have time for this because I got stuff to do, and I've got an agenda. Let's move forward. Let's see. Okay, 2019 to 2024. The original strategic plan spanned 5 years. Well, what's the significance of that? Why was that way? Because again, it's a family of plans, and what you want to do is you want to forecast and always have some idea what you're looking at for the next 5 years. This thing was supposed to be revised and updated on an annual basis. We had a 5-year plan. We're almost halfway through that thing right now. So we need to kind of update some of that stuff, and we're going to kind of look at some of that stuff here shortly. Again, the Charter Review Committee pushed back on the idea of doing this annually again. I don't know why. Maybe it was just, hey, we're busy, we don't have time to do this. Well, you know, if you don't have a plan, how are you going to get there? If you don't have a plan, any road's going to take you there. Okay, so here's some examples of what's been going on in the background based on the strategic plan that you haven't seen, okay? So here's a couple things. We did some forecasting of the budget, revenues, operating expenditures, and reserves in the out years. This was done in 2020. We looked at the reserve burn rate of this thing. This is what pushed us towards stormwater fees, because we looked at our reserves. We started forecasting ahead at the burn rate of our reserves as we tried to knock out capital improvements. And guess what? We burned up our reserves by 2024. So this was the emphasis. This is one of those things that emphasized looking ahead and forecasting your budget in the out years. We stood here and watched the Pinellas Coast Fire Department show us their forecast 5 years ahead. Hell, they even had one 20 years out ahead. We haven't done this. We haven't done any of this since 2020. It's a very, very simple process. Hey, we got projected expenditures based on some assumptions we make. We've got total projected revenues based on assumptions we make. And there's a gap. The expenditures are above the revenues, and that's what's causing the burn of your reserves, and that's what happens. So it was able to focus us on the priorities and looking ahead. We now had a methodology for prioritizing capital improvement projects and improvements. Never before had we looked at dividing these things out and prioritizing them based on goals and priorities set by the council. It was just, hey, what makes sense right now, let's do it. So we came up with a way of analyzing all of these things, and here's some of the things. We had a methodology of how we were going to prioritize these things, and then we were also going to look at how it rated or aligned with the priorities set by the strategic plan. You can see we even factored in such things as what was the funding source for this stuff, because obviously you can move up a project in priority if you're spending somebody else's money to do it. If we have Penny's money for a project, or we have an assessment, guess what? We can move up the undergrounding project in Bellevue Estates Island because we're not spending city money. So I mean, there are a lot of moving parts to this thing, and it was only then that we started looking at this stuff and figuring out whether or not it all made sense. Part of it is sanity checking stuff, okay? So what you see by the brackets there is we look at what is the primary and secondary strategic plan goal that is supported by this project, and does it make sense? You see some orange spaces there where there's a mismatch, okay? So it helps you identify areas that the goals and objectives of the strategic plan say it should be here, but it's not lining up correctly. Now that doesn't automatically stop where it is in the priority queue. It's just to flag a disparity so that we can examine it and say, well, why is that? And we can have some debate about this. The other aspect of this thing is it allowed us to develop sequences and timelines of this thing. These are the stormwater projects, and for the first time we were able to break these things out by the projects and focus on when those projects were going to kick in and the amounts. Okay. Now this hasn't been redone since we've seen these astronomical price hikes for these things. This was a very easy chart that we uploaded to our website, and it got a lot of attention and traction there. Because for the first time, people could look in this at the website and say, hey, where's my street being done? I noticed they're doing stormwater repairs on these streets. Where am I in the queue?
So real quick, without going into a lot of time or detail, so what was the criteria that was used for sequencing the stormwater projects? What did we use for that? For example, we skipped 9th Street, we went to 12th or 13th, and then I recently saw the next one is 17th and 18th.
Yeah, part of it was based on historical experience with those streets. And what we did was we set 3 different levels of severity of the problem. One was, hey, you're damaging homes and personal property. 2 is the street is impassable for, say, 24 hours. And the third was the street's impassable for a certain length of time, but it resolves itself within, say, 1 to 3 hours. So that was the initial cut on how we prioritize this thing. And then it was a matter of sequencing things with the budget reserve burning.
Do we have that data? So if someone was to ask me, Lloyd, can you show me why this street's being done first? And what criteria did you use, and where is it?
I would say we would have to go to the files of lineage to do that stuff out, because so much of this capital improvements.
Lynn went over a lot after me, and it was like you said, like the southern end, 3rd and 4th Street, that wasn't, it's still at high tide, it still has water like in my street. But some of these streets are just really, really poor. And I think, Kyle, you're probably associated with some of this. I mean, the more streets got done first.
Yeah,
it moved up.
Southern Pacific was the worst. Pretty much got ordered in the way where the city wanted.
I'm willing to stipulate that there's a ranking system and move on with the brief.
Yeah. Now, part of that issue there, and we will touch on it in different places, is there has never been any metrics involved in measurements. So it's purely anecdotal, and you know, we don't have a stopwatch going as soon as we have a heavy rain. Okay, 3 hours later the water's gone, or it's receded, 12 inches in the last.
You don't need a mattress like you're walking out in the middle of the street and the water's up to your waist. I mean, that's.
Well, yeah, that's a very simplistic way of putting it. But here's the deal.
Wait a minute, you go down a couple other streets and it's dry.
Okay, but here's the deal. So you just spent $500,000 improving the stormwater situation down there, and people are still complaining that the street's flooding. You guys just wasted $500,000 of the city's money, and you haven't fixed the problem. Well, before you came on the council, we tried addressing this issue because the problem is we've never managed expectations. When residents see a bunch of trucks pull in there and they offload a bulldozer and a backhoe and they start dumping new, fresh conduit pipe, they say, oh my God, you're here to fix this stormwater. So we go through this drill, we do that, and guess what comes along? High tide, wind-driven high tide, stormwater, heavy rain, and guess what? The streets flood. We never told those people that, hey, there are situations where we are still going to have street flooding. We never managed that expectation. So what happens? High tide, winds are right, heavy rain, 1st and 3rd Street floods.
Yeah, but I understand common sense in government died decades ago, but putting new storm pipes in was never supposed to resolve flooding, okay? It was supposed to resolve the water moving at a pace it moved 73 years ago. We did put check valves in. We put the check valve at Mark Street and tile wall in is too low. And we never removed, we never raised it up. Down around third and fourth, they put the check valve in. That does work a lot better. I mean, you still get a little bit of water in there, but it's not like anything like it was down the first. It isn't anything like it was. Even the check valve at 12th and 13th Street, if you talk to the residents, have greatly improved, even though those pipes have collapsed. But take out of the equation, I don't think anyone ever thought by putting new pipes in, you were going to resolve the stormwater.
I think you are 100% wrong, because you know that, he knows that, we all know that. But when citizen saw the trucks pull up in the front yard and unload a bunch of conduit, the city was here to fix their flooding problem. And guess what? Heavy rain, high tide, I got water in the streets. You guys just wasted $500,000 and I still have the same problem. We didn't manage the expectations. We didn't explain it properly.
But we haven't managed our expectation from the first day. We did.
I
Okay.
agree with, we are in violent agreement on that point. So the question is what has changed? We just obligated the city for a $700,000 fix, and guess what? Those people are going to be complaining about the same thing as the people on First and Third.
But doing the storm pipes, okay, if you ever want to really resolve that problem with the flooding, it can be resolved with the new pipes in there. Because all you have to do is put a slip pipe in there, a catch basin, pumps, and you're out. You don't have to redo the whole street. Just a slip pipe, the overflow goes into the catch basin, pumps it out. Having collapsed pipes are not going to resolve anything.
I won't dispute that. What I would say, though, is read the Flutie report, and they stipulate right up front that the long pole in this tent is the outflows. You don't have the easements to change
And I
those things.
just explained, you're not going to ever have that without a catch basin and, I have the floor. You're never going to resolve it unless you're willing to spend the money and pump the water down.
We digress.
Point of order, let's just move forward. Right. We can have this back and forth conversation at the end of the meeting.
Quick technical question on that. These are formula driven. You said the orange blocks, the Excel formula. If they're mismatching, it's going to pop up.
Oh, not in this, not in this. These were just markers to highlight areas
Guys,
you want to look
personally
closely at. Not in this one. This was, what I'm trying to show here is that whole CIP spreadsheet we had so many columns. I mean, literally, it's 2 arms length long. But if you continue to move right on this thing, you can start to get a picture of what's going on in the out years. And that's how we highlight some of this stuff. Okay? Let's see. What else did this thing do for us? It allows us to set priorities, and you're familiar with this term, plan of action and milestones. Right? It gives us a laser focus on some of this stuff, and once we identify what the project is, we're laser focused on that, and that's how we move forward on some of this stuff. Another thing it did for us is it gave us better business practices. For once, we were able to say, hey, we don't just throw a problem or a request to a committee or something. We give them a best business practice. We give them specifications for what we want in the deliverables. We give them a deadline. Okay? So we started embracing some good business practices and some of this stuff. And it yielded results. I think as we were going through the different committees, it was easy enough to just dust off and do the boilerplate for a different committee and write a new charter. And for the first time, they actually had concrete stuff to work on, not just, hey, we had a 5 or 10 minute data dump from the dais, and hey, do this, take a look into this problem for us. We told them what we wanted and when we wanted it. The other thing this did was it started to give us objective data and stuff. We started measuring certain things, and guess what? For the first time, we had hard data and stuff. It wasn't just anecdotal stuff. Somebody mentioned to me as I walked in here that we had this very serious problem. Well, what's the data? Show me your data, I'll show you my data on this sort of thing. There's an old saying in the fact-checking business, just because a story's newsworthy doesn't necessarily mean it's reality. So, What they showed us too was, with objective data, was, again, objective data versus just anecdotal. What's the number in the denominator? Okay, and for those of you who flunked the new math or whatever, that's the bottom number, right? So when we say that 30% of the parking complaints coming into the city is about boat trails, RVs, and parking, okay, 30%. How many people are we actually talking about complaining? 10 people. 10 people complain because the number in the denominator is almost 30. It's not anecdotal or, hey, 30% of the people I've been talking to are complaining that this just isn't working. Well, okay, so, well, let's see, what's the number in your denominator? How many people are we talking about? Well, I talked to 3 people. Well, one person is 30%. So statistics can be blended in. I will always ask that question. What's the number in the denominator? Let's see. Talking about addressing resident concerns, innuendo, assertions. Hey, it looks like, from our perspective, all the money is being spent north of the causeway. Well, is that really the case? Well, because when we break it down by capital projects, guess what? We see a different picture of all of this stuff. So once again, objective data to answer resident concerns or assertions. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of go through some of the basic things that we consider building up the strategic plan. Here's one of the things that's built into the strategic plan. If you were to go back and look at the original 2019 document, this is something that had really never been captured or thought of, but it's basically the core values for us as city officials and employees. So one of the things I highlighted here is be a good steward. So that's a question that I'm going to throw out right now. What is a good steward? We control the purse strings, we control the resources of the city, we make decisions affecting codes, people's property. What's this concept of being a good steward? I'm throwing it out there.
Do your research and make decisions with knowledge where you understand all of the picture, not just what's right in front of your face. You have to do your own work and research and be prepared to enact.
You have to look toward the future and make your assumptions accordingly based on information that you have today to plan out the next 5 years. You know, if you're going to buy a house, will I have a job? What are my interest rates? Should I take out a fixed or floating mortgage? You're considering all of these possible permutations as best you can. And frankly, 5 years is about the limit of anybody's visibility. After that, it becomes witchcraft.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
I would just, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was, just going to, just reiterating what Dave said is, you have to have the facts and be prepared to make a decision, but be open-minded enough to know that don't come in with a pre-disclosed opinion of something or reactive to a resident or one person's comment. That's, I think, where I see a lot of the swaying from being stewardship. And, look, I am on several nonprofit boards, and being a steward of those funds that are donated, they're such a priority, and it's no different than what we're dealing with here at the city. And we've got to be, when I think of stewardship, I think finances, number one, and where we stand financially with the city. And those things we can see way beyond 5 years with some good budgeting and forecasting. So we really need to focus in on that, and I think we're falling short there.
I would add just one more dimension to that, and that is, at the end of the day, we do what's right for the city and the residents, regardless of what our personal persuasion is, what our personal agenda is. At the end of the day, we make what we think is the best decision for this city and its residents. Okay?
And that includes where you live. As we've made many decisions over the last few years that have benefited the southern half of the bridge, but there's always that image that we're neglecting the south. It's absolutely not true at all. It's just unfortunate that they live in lower lying lands that are more vulnerable to the tides and the drainage. We try to do everything we can to, we'll never be able to fix it, but at least to try to make it as efficient as possible. Consider where they live and the elevation.
Okay?
See, now I didn't take any of that as being a good steward. Financially, yeah, but I think being a good steward in that sense, be proactive and make sure that we're preparing for the future. So if you see a safety hazard in front of you, okay, we haven't been good stewards. We prolong things, we massage it, we never get it accomplished, we don't attack the issues. Okay?
Well,
financially, great, okay? Yeah, spend the money, be accountable and everything like that. But when citizens come up here and have a safety issue, I don't think we've been a good steward at all.
I will counter that with what we just said. At the end of the day, we make hard decisions about what we think is best for the entire city and all of its residents, not just a laser-focused small group.
You know what, I don't care if it's a safety issue, if it's one person or half the city. It's a safety issue that needs to be addressed. And if you're putting someone in harm's way,
Coming
you're not being a good steward.
coming from a military and particularly an aviation
the military.
background, and particularly an aviation background where safety is always at the forefront of not only the material and the maintenance and the parts and the support and the flying aspect of it, but we have a responsibility to everyone in this thing.
That's right.
And there is a real-world aspect to this thing.
Okay, what we're going to do, I'm going to ask Mr. Dunn that you refrain from responding to everything, just give him the opportunity to get his point across so that we can.
Gotcha. Okay. So this is a list of assumptions from the original 2019 document. Okay? 10 of them. Very, very thin. Okay. But something I think you'll kind of get a sense for is that if you go through this, and you can do it later on at your leisure, you'll kind of see that most of these things hit everything that's still at the forefront of what we need to be thinking about this thing. This list has withstood the test of time in a lot of ways. Now, does that mean it's a comprehensive list for today, or do we need to go through that and revisit it in 2022? Well, I think if you look at this, there are some things we need to start considering because the truth is changing as we see it. We've had pandemics. We've got a high inflation rate right now. We've got logistic chain nightmares. There are a lot of things taking place. The property values are astronomical right now. People are starting to decide they can work remotely at home, so demographics are changing very quickly. So at your leisure, maybe we go back through this thing. Demographics are changing here, and we need to monitor that. The economic climate is changing very quickly, and it's going to impact not only our capital improvement process and budget, but there are also things going on. Traffic congestion. I think more and more people are moving and staying here for us. So is that going to be seasonal anymore? No, I think you're going to see an upward tick in that stuff. The trajectory of that thing is climbing. Major storm impact on Bel Air Beach. That hasn't changed, but we need to go back and take a look at how much money is in that emergency fund. We are way over the state mandated, we are way over our charter mandated thing, and are there better ways of utilizing that money with some constraints around it so that the payback back into that account has to be within so many years or whatever. There's things we can be thinking about. along those lines. What else we got? Here's some more property values. We talked about stormwater flooding. Okay. Due to Barrier Island conditions, existing elevations, legacy stormwater systems, there may not be an economical solution to fully solve the problem. We need to manage expectations on this thing. Sea level rise, long-term impact humans. Red tide, that's not going to change. We're seeing that also has an upward trajectory on it, and it's got some spin-off problems that maybe we need to start addressing some of this stuff. Again, we need to perhaps embrace a more frequent review. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat analysis. You can read through this at your thing. The thing to take away from this is that some attributes that you will see on the strengths column, in the strengths column, are also attributes in weaknesses. And the same thing in the opportunities and threats. It's a double-edged sword. You see the most, hey, we're a small city, we're flexible, we can move, shoot, communicate very quickly, but at the same time, we don't have any political clout, we don't have any economic clout, nobody's listening to us. So again, you can just kind of go through these things, and hey, our staff is small, they're responsive, they're flexible, but they are very broad, very thin depth when it comes to handling problems there. So it's a strength in some things, but in other things you don't have any depth of experience or manpower. Opportunities, threats. Some of these opportunities were sidelined. We had actually done studies on how best to optimize things like this building, the marina parking lot, and I think there were one or two other things. Our pocket parks were one of those things. We looked at those things. The planning and zoning actually gave us lists of suggestions and things to look into. Unfortunately, the pandemic came along. We were faced with higher priority problems. All of that stuff got filed and backburned. But at some point, I think it's going to be time to open the file drawer, pull those plans out, and dust them off and look at it. One good example was there is a lot of air-conditioned space in this building that we don't utilize. If you look at the utilization of this building, this room, I mean, just the foyer there, if you look at the square footages that were air conditioning and lighting, it may not be the best use of that thing. So planning and zoning had actually given us optimal uses for some of this stuff, but it got backburned. Space became our friend all of a sudden during the pandemic. So if we had moved ahead on some of that stuff, it could have turned around and big ones. Like we say, the truth changes, but we need to be flexible and adjust accordingly on some of this stuff. Goals and objectives. This was the original 2019. On the left column there, you've got the high-level goals. One or two words just to capture what that goal is. If you look at the middle column, it adds a little detail and attributes to what those goals are. And then on the right-hand column, what we built were a laundry list of objectives. What are the actual projects that we can take care of that contribute to knocking out goal number one or boosting the effectiveness of goal number one? We developed a protocol because, once again, we look at the size of our staff. It's very thin, very small. So what we did was we adopted a protocol of never having more than 2 objectives on our plate addressing any one particular goal. We maintained a long laundry list of objectives, but we only actively dealt with 1 or 2 of them at a time. Maybe on an occasion there would be a third, or as time allowed us, maybe Lynn Reeves as the city manager, the tactical guy, would pick one up that he knew, hey, I got some extra money laying around, I got some slack in the schedule, I can address a different item. Some of the red highlighted areas, what you'll see is some of these issues go back a long time. We've been addressing these for a long time. Hey, we look at stormwater. Well, in 2019, we were looking for sustainable ways to mitigate the problem. Well, we got smart, we started analyzing the budget, we look at the burn rates, guess what? We come up with stormwater fees. So that stuff changes from how we're going to mitigate the problem to actual streets being worked on. Financial management software. We're going through now a second iteration of looking for a new financial management package. We went through this once before, and here we are again. So the truth has changed once again. Consistent code compliance was on there, and I think as we start measuring stuff, and again, we're getting smarter on this stuff, I think you're going to start seeing that issue start ticking down. So again, that's the 2019 version of goals, priorities, and objectives. Okay, so the next thing that happened was in 2021. If you look at the left columns there was a change in the priorities. What we started seeing was engagement and communications with the community was becoming a much greater issue than how the neighborhood looked. So what we did was we actually consolidated communications and community, and we bumped down aesthetics. And once again, if you look at the emphasized objectives, what do we still see? We're still seeing mitigating street flooding issues, integrating the capital improvement process with the budget. Again, that goes to that matrix of how do we analyze and prioritize capital projects and blend it and align it with the budget process. We hadn't really been doing that before because we had this huge reserve pile of money in our reserves because so many projects had been abandoned and kicked further down the road, and guess what? We just took that money, threw it in the reserves. That was part of the issue here. Is a lot of these problems we're dealing with today were problems 10 years ago, and they weren't dealt with then because the current, or the regime at that time didn't know how to manage projects, didn't have project management experience, didn't know how to finance that stuff, for whatever reason. But the can was kicked down the road, but we started to get a better handle on that stuff now. Then along comes January 2022. Street flooding issues. We've dealt with the Section 94 portion of the codes and Objective 3 under beach and waters, rules and ordinance. So a lot of these things have been here for a while. We've been dealing with them for a while, and some of them are just never going to go away. March 2022, address mitigate street flooding issues, Gulf Boulevard beautification and undergrounding, Bowie's decision, and that ordinance. So these are things that they go back a while. They've been on our radar for a while. May 2022, street flooding issues, city manager selection and hiring process. That was on the radar way back. Revisiting the economic impacts of the capital improvement versus the reserve funds. Again, we have not generated a 5-year forecast or burn rate since 2020. So Gulf Boulevard beautification still there. We needed to make that playground decision, which we just did. Bowie's decision and the ordinance. We need to decide where that was going. So, again, this is just kind of like the Cliff Notes version of what is currently on our radar, what we're addressing at the moment. If you recall in your briefing with Lynn Reeves, he probably showed you that for every one of these capital projects, he has a page that delineates and describes the project in a little more detail, names an owner, and gives a timeline and some milestones and a deadline for when some of that stuff will be. I don't think we have the specificity I think we really deserve in that kind of stuff. I don't think it has the visibility that it deserves, because I think, and I will get into this a little bit later, is I think as a body, this council needs to take a bigger role in the capital project planning and sequencing. I think that's a lot of stuff going on in the shadows, and it's is kind of glossed over very quickly during the budget review process without us actually sitting back, throwing up that gigantic spreadsheet on the wall and saying, well, now tell me, why is that street ahead of this street when the flooding issue or the feedback from the residents say it's really higher priority? Why is this project so low on the priority when, hey, we've got money for it, it's not going to take that long, and for whatever reason. I think we need to be more proactive as a body in looking at the capital improvement priorities. What you're going to see in some of these things is the big identification objectives in this thing. This is kind of a mishmash of what are some of the attributes for that goal and priority, but it's also mixed in with a laundry list of projects that are just waiting for their time to bubble up to the top. As we start scratching off projects, we're going to start backfilling with these in there. So, public safety, here's some of the other stuff. Playground was in there, obviously. Contractor permitting, responsibility and accountability is always in there. Tax dollar value. Now this is one. The focus has been on best value focus, and I think everybody realizes that we don't immediately jump to the lowest bidder. Sometimes you shoot yourself in the foot. So we go for best value procurement or allocation of funds, obligation of funds. Well, what does that mean? That means that it may cost a little bit more, but we think we're getting a greater value out of it. Whether it's a warranty, whether it's the quality of the work, it's the person who's doing the work has a much better record of experience and responsibility doing projects like that. So these are some dimensions that we should become very familiar with and start thinking about. Effective, efficient, sustainable, and resilient. So I'll throw that one out right now. What's the difference between effective and efficient?
Effective gets it done. Efficient is how well you get it done.
Doing the right thing the right way. That's the difference there. Sustainable, can we always afford to do that? Stormwater, it wasn't sustainable at one point. We were burning up our reserves doing that stuff. But with stormwater fees, guess what? We believe that's a sustainable issue right now. Resilience, what is that? Well, hey, when we get to the end of our 5-year forecast, and hey, it's smoke and mirrors at that point, well, hey, maybe year 2 in our 5-year forecast, something changes, pandemic. Inflation goes through the roof, supply chain goes nuts. Do we have the resilience to deal with it? Are we flexible enough to deal with it and bounce back as quickly as possible? Do we have the flexibility built into our processes so that we can handle that issue and get on with business back to normal as quickly as possible? So we're always improving the budget process, capital planning, our contracts, and investments. Continue to invest in our human resources and our city staff. Part of that is updating the job descriptions, the evaluation process, compensation, training, and development. Grants are in there. Obviously, technology is always going to be in there. Okay, let's see, what else do we have here? Tax dollar value. Here's some other things. Budget process based on such things as fiscal responsibility, strategic goals, and objectives. Question, what is fiscal responsibility?
Contracting at correct and appropriate times.
I'm throwing it out there because what I want to know is that at the end of the day, when we start thinking about this budget process, and we talk about fiscal responsibility, I want to be thinking the same thing you want when we talk about fiscal responsibility. And I don't think we all agree on that. So I think that's one of the things we need to hash out of this thing going into the budget process. A good steward, and part of that is fiscal responsibility. What does that entail? You can save that for another time and later consideration, but I think everybody needs to be thinking about that. Comms and community, we can go through this at a later time. Let's see, aesthetics, beach waterfront. Takeaways from all of that, what you've just seen for the budget process, what we're going to get into. We're going to jump into the budget process, what to take away from this review of the strategic plan. The strategic plan is part of a family of plans. They're all related and they need to align. They have to shake hands, and when you look at one thing, you should be able to rationalize it from the other perspectives. In other words, if this is our number one priority, our number one capital project, can we rationalize that based on what our priorities are in the strategic plan? And if we can, are we being fiscally responsible and then move on to the budget? That's one takeaway from this. From the capital improvement analysis, the 80-20 Pareto principle. Right? Concentrate on the valuable few. Right? So basically, 80% of our budget is in 20% of our line items. If you look at just, and depending on what nomenclature you use, depending on who's writing that budget spreadsheet for us and how they describe that line item, because some things are placeholders, some things are, well, we've broken out this cost. Well, you need a line item for all those costs within the different departments. What you will find is our expenditures are probably in the top half a dozen line items. Give me the top three. What are the top three, just off the top of your head?
Police, stormwater. Personnel.
Streets.
Personnel costs. Personnel costs, police, right? Those are the biggies, those are the costs. And yet, once again, capital improvements are in there as well. So there's a top three, right? Personnel costs, sheriff's contract, and capital improvements. In my view, we don't spend enough time looking at these things. Once
Personnel
again,
costs.
concentrate on the valuable few.
How can personnel cost be that? We have how many employees? 5?
There also, there's some.
Okay, I'm not going to quote numbers here, but I will ask you to go back to
Sure.
the budget and look at what are, and I will bet you a coat that the number one line item is personnel costs. Not only salary, but you're talking about what's going into retirement,
Sure, exactly.
benefits,
The whole thing,
all of
whole
that
package.
stuff. It's huge. It's huge. So when we start glossing over things about, hey, we're going to change this, we're going to change that, boy, we took it at face value. We would bring, hey, I want to do this with the personnel. I want to bring somebody else on board. I want to change this. Well, let's take it a little closer. Let's break out the magnifying glass on some of these personnel costs and make sure we truly understand what we're doing.
We just did one CIP project that was $750,000. I'm pretty sure the total personnel is not bigger than that.
It's
I'll
pretty
bet you
close.
I'll bet you another Coke.
I will bet you a Coke that if you, once again, depending on how you break it out, the number that sticks in my brain is 800,000 for personnel.
For personnel.
Not, and I don't mean just salary, but once again,
No, I got you.
look at
Right.
retirement and benefits and all those things going in there, medical, insurance, all that stuff. It's huge.
No, it's not, I don't think it's huge. I mean, we have a minimal staff of employees. Do you want to cut their benefits? Do you want to go find your own health insurance? Do you want to tell them, get a retirement plan? I mean,
Okay, you're taking me in the literal sense once again. When I say
you're not
you
going
do
to
it,
cut, you're not going to cut these numbers, is what I'm saying. It's pie in the sky.
It is.
Point of order, all right? You guys just need to.
okay,
It's reality here. I mean,
No,
this is
hold
all.
on. I don't think that's what Mr. Gunn was saying. He was not saying cut somebody's
I
budget.
didn't
What
say-
he was saying was it at least in the top
That's a
three
big one,
of our
yeah.
line items. And that's all it was stated. And it is a fact, and there's nothing we can do to change that, but it's something that we have to acknowledge and accept while we're doing the budget.
Yep.
And so I don't want you to
What I'm
take the wrong idea out of what he said, because he's not saying slice anything.
What I'm saying, Mr. Mayor, is there's two items you're not going to touch, okay? The police, and the only way you're going to touch your personnel is if you cut benefits or wages. okay?
Yes, but you have to analyze those numbers, those are your starting numbers, and then with whatever's left, that's the way you
At the end
balance
of the
your
day,
budget.
those numbers are going to be those numbers, is what I'm saying. You can roll it around, massage it all you want. At the end of the day, if you want to have a workable staff, what's this old saying? Skilled labor isn't cheap, cheap labor isn't skilled. Okay, so at the end of the day, if you want a good staff, you got to pay for it. And
Okay.
we have a great staff.
I'm not going to break this down to simplistic logos. What I'm going to say is I'm going to go back to fiscal responsibility and being good stewards. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. At the end of the day, we will probably end up at the same place. But we've done our due diligence. We've been fiscally responsible and we've been good stewards of our resources. And we understand why certain things are there. Once again, you're going to look at capital improvement projects, you're going to look at disconnects, and it's, again, not to disallow it, it's to understand why those things are
Thank
there.
you for giving me the definition of insanity. Do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. That's what you're telling me, but only you know the results before you do them over again.
No, I'm saying, let's do this smartly. Let's do our job, why we were elected, and not just gloss over stuff because we think that's the way it's always been done and that's the way it's going to get done now. No, that is not being fiscally responsible and good
These
stewards.
police is the police. Personnel is personnel. These people are not getting great, outstanding wages. I think during the
It has nothing to
discussion-
do with the wages. It
No,
has to do.
wait. Discussing, we're trying to look for a city manager, and we don't even want to post the job requirements of the salary, okay?
We're digressing. I promise to get through this in an hour. And,
Continue.
And I'm
You bring up
almost,
subjects.
I'm almost there. We're digressing.
Let's
That's
get through
reserved
this
for a
presentation
future.
and then we'll move on, right?
I've already pointed out, I think the council needs to get engaged in capital projects. I think a lot of that stuff goes on in the shadows, and at the end of the day, when we review the budget, it's glossed over. Here's my list of capital projects. I'm going to take this money from the general fund or from reserves, and I'm going to do that. Nobody has sanity checked the priorities of why we're doing it that way. I think that's one of the things, to be fiscally responsible and to understand what's going on in this city. And one last thing, forecasting the out years, this goes to flexibility and resilience. It means you're thinking about the future. We know that, hey, the truth can change at any moment, but we are at least being responsible enough to look down the road, make some assumptions, and try to be ahead of the game. Here's the family of plans, the strategic planning, the goals and the priorities trickle down to capital projects, and those things combined shape the budget process and the allocation. At some point, when we actually go through the strategic plan to reshape it, come up with new goals, reprioritize those goals, come up with new objectives, new attributes, new metrics for that thing. This is what I think we need to come to. They're called stretch goals. And at some point, where do we want to be in 5 or 10 years? We throw some pie in the sky stuff out there, and it gives us something to work towards. But if you look at some of the stuff, these numbers and these dates, I didn't just pull these out of the sky. These are numbers that Lynn Reeves collaborated. Okay? So, hey, we're dealing with the budget process. We're having a lot of questions, a lot of discussion on this stuff. Maybe we should be looking at a way to reduce our expenditures by 5% in so many years. Is that out of the question? I don't know. Anybody who's worked in government knows what it's like working with a governmental budget. It's not just, hey, we want you to cut money in this area. It's like, no, give me a budget that's 5% smaller than last year. Last year. And I don't care where you take it, you've got to decide where to do that. It's not a stretch of the imagination for a bunch of smart people to sit around the table, throw options out, and come up with a plan for reducing expenditures. Or for those of you who haven't worked for a government or in a budget climate like that, how to increase revenues. Some of you work on that side, and so that's different. Hey, we've got this backlog of capital improvement projects. How long is it going to take us to eliminate that backlog? I'd said we had been kicking capital projects down the road for a decade. And we're addressing some of that stuff. How big is that backlog still? When could we realistically wipe out that backlog? I don't know. Gulf Boulevard utilities, undergrounding, and you're wrestling with those options right now. Street lighting modernized by 2025, develop and implement a marine improvement plan. That goes to dusting off the planning and zoning recommendations on how best to utilize some of our properties. And there's probably a bunch of them. We can sit down and brainstorm these things all night long, debate some of the stuff. I'm just saying, have some stretch goals. Where do we want to be in 5 or 10 years? Set a goal for the next council. We think this is possible. We're going to put that as a stretch goal in our strategic plan. If you guys think you can't do it or move the goalposts, that's fine. Be thinking along those lines. Okay.
Has the city ever looked into borrowing money to expedite the CIP projects? Even bank loans, something so that we can get that done now.
Yeah, that was a road that was discussed offline with Lynn Reeves a lot. Lynn Reeves was always averse to a bond initiative. We still owe money on this place. We have a debt service that goes out 2-3 more years.
2 more years, I think we looked at that.
I mean, so once that's done, we're going to get an instant pay raise.
Sure. That email class I attended, I actually brought up bonds, and they said no, they wouldn't recommend that. They said, how much money? And I just threw a number out there. They said, anything under some huge number, like to us, like anything under 10 million, just go to a bank.
Yeah.
Just get a bank loan. The rates are better, everything's better.
Now that was just, again, that was Lynn Reeves' opinion. He was dead averse and averse to any bond issues. I think it had been discussed, maybe at the previous council, I don't remember, but at the council level, we were kind of averse to it. Ron Saganek on the Citizens Advisory Committee, banker background, he's always kind of proposed that idea, we could do that. So, I mean, these are options.
Okay, just curious.
Again,
Right.
what's the best solution for this city? I don't know.
Because we always talk about how the prices seem to be escalating. There may be some time, where they do come back down. Who knows?
Other than this building, we always pay is the revenue.
Right.
That's why it takes so long to get these projects completed. Going back to the reserve, our reserve is too large.
Well, I know at one time, I think at the end of my last term, I had proposed the hurricane, I don't know what the outcome was, but reducing that hurricane fund, which we had $1 million in it, back down to what was required and make available a line of credit if in fact we got in a position where we needed money quick.
Yeah.
And talked to Ron about it, and he said, yeah, those are possibilities, those are things we can do. So, but I don't think anything came of it. So.
And see, for us to include those funds, we have to be way ahead of where we are right now, which it won't happen.
Right.
We're so far in the budget now that we actually need to start considering that for next year.
Correct.
If we want to finish it. We'll never finish it up. We don't have that much money, but at least we will get a head start on something more extreme.
We start talking about budgeting in September instead of waiting until the spring, you know?
How much did this building cost?
3 million, the
Okay.
final payoff would be 5 million.
Okay, so we would have had borrow of 5 million from the bank.
No, we borrowed
We
3.
borrowed
but
3.
Tracy
We
was-
borrowed 3.
We borrowed 3, the final payback would be 5.
Okay, right?
Who created the mortgage for this building?
I'm sorry?
Who created the mortgage for this building?
We, our financial officer broke it. And one of the interesting aspects of that is it was negotiated without the option for early payoff.
Right.
Is she in jail now?
She's no longer working here.
Thanks to a previous council.
That is just mind-boggling before I even became on council about the early payoff. I never heard of it.
Join
I've
the
heard of
club.
penalties.
Join the club.
But never,
This is
there's
guilty.
no exit strategy.
Yeah.
My view of going through the budget process for the 5th time now is, as a body, I don't think we have the expertise, the visibility, or the insight to be making some of the things we're throwing out, the suggestions we're throwing out. And maybe at a future date, maybe a year from now, maybe 2 years from now, we will have a handle on the process where we can intelligently make a decision like, hey, we're going to obligate the city for a bond initiative and deal with this problem. We've looked ahead 5 years, and it's in our best interest to deal with this problem now. What were the assumptions we made to make that decision? We make a sound business decision, but right now, I don't think we have that acumen. That's my opinion. We're getting there.
I know a guy.
I'm sorry.
I know a guy.
Trust me, bro.
Does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, sir. That's it.
Thank you very much, Vice Mayor Dunn.
Very nice.
We need a break.
I'll take a break.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn.
Take 5 minutes, Patty. Back at 7:25.
Okay, thank you.
And the last meeting we had, we went through these individual expenditures, and I didn't receive any emails where any of you had any great concerns. So maybe we just need to go over them now. Jimmy Shirley, I believe you would be a good one. Probably have some things you saw that you maybe had questions about.
I don't know, I just actually was telling Pam, I was wanting to review it against some of our existing financials that we just got at the last meeting. I haven't got a chance to do that. So I don't know that I'm prepared to discuss
Okay,
my
that's fine.
concerns.
I just want to
Okay.
call on everyone.
Yeah,
and-
no, that's okay.
All right. Lloyd Roberts, how about you?
Same.
Same. Okay. Mike Sable.
My question was, looking at page 18, this is the interest earnings, interest on investments, and I noticed adopted budget in 2022 anticipated $10,000 in revenue, and we're still showing the same, knowing that the last few years were pretty bad in interest. About how much money do we have that's working as interest, and what do we still anticipate $10,000 this year or more? It's at the very top, line number 361-100.
I'll look into that with Heather.
Yeah, it's
Just compare.
seeing that, you know,
I know-
new markets coming up.
I know we have some CDs that we've rolled over,
Okay.
and I'll just check on how those rates have changed. And actually calculate that.
Yeah, like I said, normally we don't have revenue, but it might be a case where we can increase revenue there. Better than that, nothing else.
All right. Councilmember Baker.
The only thing I'm looking at is the capital improvements, instead of listing everything, carpet and everything like that, quick. If we could just put put that in one big fund, draw from that. You know, put away money every year for this that we're not going to use, and then reduce that maybe by 5%.
That's what page, Ron?
I didn't know what it is. I don't have it in front of me right now. I'm just talking about
Page 48.
I know I've caught everybody off guard with these questions. I have a plan for Monday night, which I'm going to speak
pretty good
on
cop.
shortly, but I just didn't get anything back, and I was just wondering if anyone had any items that were just nagging at them, and they thought that maybe something should be changed. And yours was on 48?
Well, start with capital improvements, man. Go through each one. Like, when we go to redo the car meeting, we make a time record. We didn't have any expense for car expenditures. It's just examples. Okay? And I'm not really ready to.
No, that's cool.
That's the rule.
All right, Mr. Gunn?
I'd actually built a list. During the process, I kept notes and I built a list, and my bad, I was going to forward it to Lynn Reeves and see what else needed to be added to it. I'll just hit a couple of things here that kind of stuck out to me, and I think these things kind of deserve greater look at. Okay, so Kyle is already tasked with giving us a recommendation on the Gulf Boulevard thing. So that was one thing that is out there right now. Another deliverable is some idea of this code enforcement thing, right? Because we as a matter of fact, the last council meeting, we tabled that issue, the budget contract for the code enforcement part-time guy, right? And part of that was because the city manager had sat down during the budget process and said, hey, I'm thinking about bringing more of that stuff in-house and creating a hybrid and reorganizing that aspect of it. And yet the next thing we see is a full budget. Crank the numbers, it's 20 hours a week part-time for that guy. And so somebody owes us some idea of where we think we're going with that. That's just my view. I mean, I don't know if you did the Vulcan mind meld with Lynn as you walked out the door. Or...
I think he was budgeting for the exact same with hopes to reduce.
Okay.
So if we want to make a decision upfront to reduce, we could write that into the budget that way.
So I don't know, maybe you need to get with the staff, your staff, and reconsider this thing and make sure that you're thinking of it in the exact same terms perhaps that Lynn Reeves was, or whatever communications he had, to make sure that we're going to make an informed decision on this thing. Because what you just proposed is, and it goes to another thing, was this concept of placeholders in the budget. You're basically saying, okay, well, let's just obligate $15,000, and maybe it's just going to be $10,000 down the road. Well, I guess I'm saying that's a budgetary tool available to us, but is it something we can get past right now by making an informed decision and say, okay, I'm going to make these changes, and all I need is $12,000, with the caveat that if I made a mistake here, or I move the decimal point one place too far, hey, all it takes is come before the council and say, hey, I need a budget increase of $3,000 for this. I mean, no harm, no foul. Let's just do the best we can on some of this stuff.
I did have a discussion with Lynn, I don't know, a few months ago about the same issue. And he had told me that, and I'm sure some of you guys were here, ladies, that had been proposed to the council where the city was going to hire a part-time person, and this is 100% in lieu of the sheriff's officer. And then Laura was going to take over, and then a part-time person was going to come on The bottom line was it was going to save the city money
Mhm.
and more than likely actually provide more hours that Laura would be doing actually driving around and checking things. Now, I can tell you firsthand that when I was knocking on doors and chatting with people, I mean, I'm thinking back, people brought that on to me unsolicited, that they preferred when Laura was doing it. I know we've heard other people say different things. I'm just telling you, more people told me to my face, I didn't ask them the question. I just asked them, is there anything I could focus on if I'm fortunate enough to be elected? People brought that up. Said, I don't like that sheriff guy walking around. You know, we would prefer a city staff person taking care of those duties. So I'm just telling you that information.
So the basis of that feedback, was it because they didn't want a guy in a uniform and a badge and a gun knocking on their door?
That was one part of it. The other part was they felt like one of our city employees knew better, knew the city better, knew what was going on better, could find things better.
Yeah.
That's what they felt.
I mean, there's a lot of dimensions to this issue because on the flip side of the coin, the thinking for getting a part-time sheriff was you now have another car moving around within the city limits. And the response to code enforcement is much better when a guy with a badge knocks on the door. And we got that practice actually from some of the neighboring municipalities because they contracted out a sheriff part-time to do it, and they felt they got much better response with code enforcement that way. So, I mean, it's just something we need to,
It's, I heard from other municipalities that usually if the guy knocks on your door, that'll be the only time it happens. Whereas if it's somebody that's, you know, office personnel, everybody knows this person, hey, how you doing, all friendly. It doesn't wait. It's just not as impactful. And generally you'll have repeat offenders and pick and choose who your friends are, and you decide to cite this one and not cite that one. And I think, in my opinion, having a police officer doing that job, it's less biased or less room for bias. And the only thing that I don't like, and this goes across the board for the sheriff's department, is they're all about education. They're all about education and giving warnings and giving people second chances. It's a hassle to write a ticket, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, there's some people that deserve a ticket. And that's revenue that should be coming back to this community whenever you have a violator. Right now I can count 5 items that are going on with code enforcement that it seems that we're not getting anywhere with it, and it may be for legal reasons, but if our code enforcement officer had not been on vacation last week, I believe that some of those things would have been curtailed. We wouldn't be having some of the problems we were having this week. So that's kind of where I stand on it. I actually like the fact that we use an outside agency for code enforcement. Yes, there is a learning curve. They have to understand our code, but we're also good at giving directives. We're having a lot of these issues. Please go find them, such as the tree issue that's going on right now. So that's where I stand.
It's well expressed, Mr. Mayor. I mean, I never liked the man with the badge when I was doing something wrong approaching him. So, I mean, I can understand people saying, you know, it's a little bit. When I went door to door, I didn't get one band and put it on the code enforcement. I was told most of it was Danny, and very professional. Danny was just a down-to-earth guy. So I'm not saying anything's wrong with him. Good guy, he's a great guy. Deal with it.
Frank, is your deal on? I can't hear you. Is your thing?
Yeah, it's on. I'm sorry. What I'm saying, the mayor expressed greatly about using the sheriff. And I think we should stay with the sheriff. Maybe if we want to cut it to 15 hours and try that to save some money.
Well, another thing is, I don't really want to put city staff at risk whenever you knock on the door, tell somebody they're doing something wrong, because there's always that opportunity that they can get violent.
Well, I like the way you put the bias, you know, I'm your friend and I'm gonna look the other way. Sure.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, do you have one alibi? It was on page 24, is computer software. And we were increasing from 6,350 to 7,000. I believe you talked earlier, it was perhaps about accounting software specifically that was driving the increase.
That's what we were told, yes.
Yeah, that's correct. It's the accounting software that they're looking into. It is a large house.
It's because we were using a budget price Peachtree accounting, I believe, or QuickBooks. It used to be Peachtree. Anyway, and then this is something more professional, but I don't know what it is. And don't
Well, no,
know
I
what-
understand.
I would like to know what the advantages truly are of spending that kind of money, because at the end of the day, we're very small.
And teaming, I brought up teaming with other communities to use the same joint license.
I'd like to circle back to the code enforcement thing one more time. Regardless of which way this thing goes, it's incumbent upon us to measure this thing. Because we had no clue whether it gets better or worse. How do you objectively say, well, we reduced the budget, but did it get better? Did the number of complaints go down? Did the number of hours increase? I don't know.
You're referring to the reporting that we're receiving right now, and that's on us for not demanding that. I know we get reports, but you're wanting it a little more granular to, let's have some details. What's the, whenever you write a citation, you should write a report right then and there that goes along with it, so we fully understand what it is that we're talking about. Kyle can testify that we're receiving emails and phone calls about various things that are going on within the city, but we don't have all the details. And they'll even tell you the code enforcement officer has been out there, but whenever you look at the report, it's one line. And was it resolved? Was it cited? You know, what was it? And you're right. We should have more on that. And maybe keep long-term history, something that goes along with that, so that this time next year, we can say for the entire year, this is really what went down. And here's where our problems are with the code enforcement or the code itself.
That's all I had.
For years, and it's only a couple of years since we've had the sheriff's doing our code enforcement. We had an in-house code enforcement officer. I don't believe we ever got reports of how many, Patty, do you remember getting reports of how many code enforcement visits there had been or citations that had been issued when we had our own officer?
I believe that they were both named Jack, but.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
For simplicity.
It was reported.
Yeah.
I remember Jack.
Yeah. But I mean, I would be very much in favor of bringing it back in-house, rather than using the sheriff's office. You know, they're more familiar with our code than the sheriffs are, and
I think
propose bringing it back.
I think, you know, to your point too, is I expect more from the sheriff, and I don't think we're getting more.
Yes.
I would expect to see more presence on the streets. I don't think any of us should have to pick up the phone and say the street's blocked off, there's all this on-street parking on our road. There should be someone circulating the neighborhood, and that doesn't happen. I rarely see a police officer.
Now, that would be our law enforcement, not code enforcement.
Well,
because the
you call-
after-hours parking happens, or the on-street parking happens all the time.
No, I'm talking about construction workers. It's code issues, really, because construction workers not parking on the same side of the road. You can't get through the road because they've got it blocked. Landscape guys there, a construction truck comes, no one looks at where they're parking and they're blocking the road. So things that are I mean, I don't need to get into all the details, but things that you shouldn't have to pick up the phone and call about.
I would think that this would be directly driven. I just think that maybe he's not been given, not told what to do, to what extent.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe there's just not enough direction, but there are a lot of code violations when you go around the city if you pay attention. Simple things that are not being addressed.
You are right, and I've spoken to Deputy Black a few times since I became mayor, and he always asks, "What can I do? How can I make this better for your city? What do you need out of me? Just tell me." And because I don't have all the details,
Right.
So and that's where we probably need to spend a little bit of time to, no matter who it is that's doing code enforcement, they should have the same set of instructions. And maybe we could bring it back in-house, but I would like to give the Sheriff's Department time to try to work this out because they are a lifelong partner with our community, and it's just a little bit more, compared to the grand scheme of what all we're paying right now to the Sheriff's Department for law enforcement. I'll stand behind that, but I'm always open to the council's wishes.
I go up and down Goff Boulevard a couple times a week. I think I see him, I see our sheriff out there all the time. I don't ever go more than a mile without at least seeing one patrol. And I think he's doing an excellent job. I mean, Sunday, it's a construction job, but they're out there.
Someone else raised their hand.
In discussions with Lynn Reeves on that subject, where I come from, you always had standing orders, operation guidelines, stuff like that. You knew what you were supposed to do that day, patrol or whatever. It seems to me, not only in code enforcement, but also in the sheriff's thing, there was always a reluctance, and I wasn't sure whether it was at Lynn's level or Captain Liner's level or whatever, to provide that direction to the sheriff when they came on their watch or shift or whatever you call it, to provide a structured format for what they were supposed to accomplish during that watch. There was always seems to be a reluctance or a pushback on that. The other thing I will mention is that this whole code enforcement thing, I think, it's not a big budget issue, but I think we don't know what the true costs of that process is. Because there's so many things I think we do where we just do it. We don't capture, hey, what did it really cost? Yeah, it only took 10 minutes, but do we ever account for those man hours and that sort of thing? This is one process, code enforcement. It runs through every one of these strategic goals. It's a safety issue when it comes to permitting. It's a tax dollar value when it comes to budget stuff. It's a communications community issue. It's an aesthetics issue. It runs through the entire gamut of priorities in this thing, and we don't understand it or give it its due emphasis. It's a high visibility thing for the city and the residents, and I think we need to probably get our arms around and provide some more structure. Exactly what you're saying.
Well, while we're discussing this, we have a citizen who has decided to erect a tower in his backyard. And if the thing falls, it's falling on somebody's home, no matter what. Even with a code enforcement officer, we have no teeth to actually do anything about it. If the guy says, "I'm not going to take this tower down," which is what he said, our hands are tied, and it could be months before someone comes along and says, "You take this down, or you go to jail." And so that's another something else to consider is how much teeth does our code actually have? We have code, and it's the law abiders aren't the problem. It's the ones that are just sticking their middle finger up in the air to the rest of the city. And how do we address this? Because we've got a guy that's taken 9 years to build a house. We've got another guy that's putting up a huge tower and antenna in his backyard. We've got a guy that doesn't want to cut down a tree that's a nuisance tree. Just dumb things that reasonable people would resolve real quick. But these are some major issues for our community. As beautiful as Bel Air Beach is, we have some problems here, and we need some direction on what to do about this. Our city attorney, in fact, Kyle, if you don't mind, would you kind of bring them up to speed on the issues that I just brought up?
Yeah, so with the tower, we just issued a notice of violation. Unfortunately, it took a little bit of, with our attorney being on vacation this past couple of weeks, to get a definitive, okay, this is what we're going to do. And we decided last Friday to issue a notice. We sent it via certified mail. And I tried to, I knocked on the residents that day, and no one answered. I tried to talk to somebody that day. So in the notice we gave the 15 days, we cited them for not having the tower permitted. After discussing with the attorney, thought that was the best course. We cited the overall requirement for a permit, and we also cited the stipulations that if you do erect a tower within the city, just to have that included in the notice. The goal is within 15 days, which is a reasonable time period for the due process, we want him to submit information about this tower. And I know that some of the residents have kind of done their own homework, but we want him to come forward and present the actual applications that are needed to have this tower. He has reached out to our code enforcement officer and left him a message. Plan is tomorrow. We're going to contact him and walk him through the steps of what you have to do to get this permit. Once he submits something, chances are it's not going to be our code. We move that going forward. I'm going to discuss with the attorney what the best reasons are that we would deny this permit, and then move forward based on what the reaction is. He's done some homework on the case laws that have been upheld in communities, and from what he found was that the federal regulations recommend working with residents that have this hobby of the ham radio to try to come to some in-between that allows them to do their hobby but doesn't violate our code or present a danger within the community. So it's kind of a step-by-step process. If this resident in fact says, I don't care, 15 days are up, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, the next step is we're going to take him to a hearing. At that point, he can come to the hearing in front of the magistrate, he can present his case, we present our case, the magistrate makes a ruling, imposes fines with deadlines and daily fees and interest that we've seen kind of in the other cases. That could go on too if he wants to say, I don't care about your fines, he wants to run them up, he wants to get liens on this property. It would be the process of getting into that point where at that point the attorney said that we could file for an injunction and get the courts involved. If we get the courts involved, then they can give notice with a penalty of jail time when you get to that point. From talking to the attorney, there's really no point in our process that's written in our ordinances, and he talked to some of his colleagues in his firm, that we get involved where we forcefully remove a tower. I know some people kind of suggested that in the emails, but that brings out a lot of problems. Not something we want to do with some of these properties. It's very expensive. It's a little different than cutting deep grass, with the pavement. So I did explore that, and he said that is not, we don't want to go in there with a sheriff and be forcefully tell them, because you gotta think about it, people have rights, and it is their property, you know, you're protected from government coming in and just.
That's why, at least my thinking, that's why it really should be in the hands of a sheriff, not a person, because that's a lot of risk there. I mean, I know you knocked on doors. I did it. There's a big reason I got PTSD from knocking on doors when bad things happen. It should be somebody that's used to dealing with these volatile situations, because, I mean, we looked at it. I mean, if he claims it's an antenna and now he's playing federal, it's difficult, and that's why we need a professional. That's the face of the city, along with an attorney.
That's what I was gonna ask, does he have the federal permit for, you know,
He does have a
registering?
federal license.
He does
Yeah.
have a license, but
As a ham radio.
as a ham radio operator, there's no such thing as a license for an antenna.
No, no, but,
What,
wait, well, let me interrupt you a minute. There is, the FCC, you do have to register it through the FCC, and you get a permit for it.
you register.
I know that because I
radio.
do it with my,
Isn't it your radio you register?
I think it's the receptive
System.
device,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
So with our Shrimpos,
System.
we have to register them, yeah.
Is the antenna commercially manufactured, or is this his own design and manufacturing?
Which one's up?
Do not have that information. I'm hoping to gain more
What's that, the
information.
tower?
It looks like a commercial
triangle.
I did look it up. I want to, is that the same one? Or was it, no, it was he used to have a pole, is what it was.
8 years ago, he had this humongous 20-foot antenna canvas,
Right.
okay, on a pole, okay?
And that can, believe it or not, he was allowed to have that.
And you know, well, you're right. I mean, because Lynn tried to get him to remove that, and the FCC more or less said no, all right? And then he moved. And he then tried to erect this tower and some HOA complex, which threw him the hell out. So then he came back, he was going for a while. And he was renting his house, and then he came back here and decided, well, I'm going to put it here now. And he poured a pad. The setbacks are not even anywhere in the requirements. I mean, it's right against the neighbors.
The code says 1.3 times the length, height of an antenna. So if he has a 40-foot antenna or a pole, or I'm sorry, tower, he has to be 53 feet away from any neighbor. Well, that's physically impossible.
It's 30 inches from the neighbor's property.
There's homes on all sides, including his own.
So with that thought, is there anything that we can do? Because what you just explained is a lot of time. It is energy. We're talking probably February of next year before this gets, and look, I think you're doing a great job. You jumped right on this when we approached that. Kudos to you, but you can only do so much. The attorney can only do so much. Meanwhile, we're in hurricane season. Is it going to fly into somebody's house? It's right.
Well, we don't even know if the concrete, it's
Correct.
bolted. It's 3 poles with a crisscross.
Truss.
You can climb on it. Anyway, there's bolts coming up out of the concrete, and that's what holds it in place. There's no guy wires or anything like that. We don't even know if he poured a large enough concrete underground structure to support the thing.
I guess that's why I asked whether it's a commercially manufactured, because they would probably go through some permitting, engineering design approval, wind mitigation kind of stuff. But if it's a home manufactured, home design, home manufactured.
So it even gets worse. So he has attached motors to it and he can literally disconnect it from the ground and then put it on a small pole so that it lays down in his yard. And then he has another motor raising and lowering the center mast of the whole thing, and it's all homemade. So there is no instruction set for what he's doing. It's and this goes back to the whole code enforcement. If you have somebody that's willing to completely ignore everything, no matter how many times he's been contacted, and you send someone who is not prepared to defend themselves, I just think it's a bad situation. That was my sole reason for shooting it down last time, because I believe that I don't want to put anyone at risk by trying to enforce our code.
So what is the timeline? Can you give it anything to you before, like you said, jail time or something? Because the guy's, I think, around 80 years old.
Wait about?
Actually, wait with Rosa, with 10
A life sentence doesn't mean much at that
Yeah.
age.
Did they give you anything like a timeline?
I mean, we're looking at months.
About
if
20
we're that
years or
far.
something.
The hope is that we step by step follow the process and hopefully can really smooth this guy.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. I got, look, I'm agreeing with you with hope, you know. but-
Yeah.
The other thing is, have we ever reconciled when the code enforcement guy goes out and the fine is attached, how much money we bring in to offset his wages? Do you understand where I'm coming from? Have we ever done a reconciliation of that?
Yeah, I don't think we go into, I mean, probably haven't because we're not looking at enforcing this as a revenue source.
not a
We
problem.
just
It's not a
wanted
revenue
to, we just want to resolve them, right?
No, I
And-
understand that, but I mean, money's money.
I know,
Yeah,
but I
so-
just,
I mean, sometimes these guys are,
but we can look because it's in there as our
Yeah.
fines, it's listed on our budget, on.
yeah, I mean, that one
actual-
person that came in here, I think it was Drummond, he says he's fined $29,000 or whatever.
We got the magistrate's ruling on it, so it's like, now, probably doing that.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, you know, does that offset the wage disparity, you know?
I'm just looking at page 17, code violation fine. We have a budget, well, it says in 2020 to 2021, we got 34,000. Budget for last year was
You're on page
1,000,
17?
budget for this year, pardon?
17, you said?
17, bottom line.
Yeah, okay.
1K.
Yeah, I don't think we budget anything for it, it's just whatever it is, it's a windfall sort of
Yeah.
thing.
We brought in 34,000?
2 years ago, or last year, yeah.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I flagged was why was it set at 1,000? We know there's going to be more than that, but
And how much does the sheriff cost us for the code enforcement? Does anybody have that over the top?
55,000,
55?
for some reason I
So
thought
even if we get
65.
34,000, we're still down.
It's a losing
20.
business.
Yeah, it's really
That's
just
not
trying to
what it's
keep our
for.
city. Yeah.
54,000, and we brought in 34.
then that brings us, this brings us around to when, this is something Kyle and I were talking about today, how do you determine what the appropriate negotiation tactic is for paying these long-standing and outrageous fines? Such as that one. Now, if a magistrate orders it, don't they have to pay it? Is that right? Okay, so there's no getting out of that one, but I think we did a half off on that, the guy that's building the house.
Just, and back to Drummond, just real quick, because I was gonna ask Laura, do we need more detail on that? Is that even still being talked about? Has anyone spoken to him, just while we're on the subject of him before we move to something else?
I have not contacted him since the council meeting. He did provide us with there's 2 payments, which we have on record. One of the payments was for a public records request fee. I'm not sure if I presented that. The other payment was the $800 plus the processing fee for paying with his credit card. That was the payment that he settled with Lynn, which included the 2 different rental registrations and the late fees to stop the daily fines. So you got, if you look at the timeline, this hearing took place with the order in 2021 early, and for over a year he was racking up daily fines, $75 a day plus the interest, and he eventually started communication with Lynn, and they came to that agreement sometime, I want to say in March, I don't know the exact date, where Lynn is like, if you pay what you owe, the rental registration late fees, I can stop that daily fine, because for that long, since the order, he didn't pay.
So for an entire year, he's getting fined daily and paying interest. So
Yes.
I think the question I had for Lynn, and he and I talked on the phone recently about this,
He said,
and he said there's a lot of history, and he was going through it, and a lot of it was from memory. I said, could Laura just put together a timeline? Because the reason Mr. Drummond came to council meeting was because Lynn advised him to. We didn't have, none of us had any information that we could even speak to Mr. Drummond about, you know, maybe we could take half, maybe we can settle on a 50%, because that's what we've done in the past. But we didn't have any information. We were all kind of blindsided and didn't know he was coming.
I asked him to come. I don't think he spoke to me.
Oh, Lynn had told him to
He
too.
emailed all of us, I think.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
emailed him
But
back,
it
it
was-
was right at the last minute.
So he had his timeline, and we didn't have any information. So it might be nice if we have it, and one of us could talk to him and say, hey, if you come back to council, we'll put it on the agenda, we'll talk about it, and we'll try to come up with a settlement for you. Or
Can we do that since it's a magistrate order now, or what?
I don't know what the rules are.
Her order was a very small amount compared to what he owed.
Yeah, I don't know what the amount is.
In the past, I think the example was the pergola, that you guys did a 50% forgiveness
For
on
each,
total fund.
right.
And that was from late fees and interest, so the council can determine a reduction.
So he would owe us 15 is what we're saying?
We've done 50%, half of what they owed.
But what was the magistrate amount?
I'm going to tell you why the pergola is different than this case. The pergola, the guy knew that he lived here, he had put up this thing, if memory serves me correct, he had installed it, and didn't really want to take it down, but there was interaction going on, and eventually we worked something out with it. This case with the small fine turning into a huge fine was a property owner that was not in touch with his home, wasn't in touch with the city, he wasn't checking up on things, he wasn't, the addresses provided to send out notifications were either being ignored or not being delivered, but we had no way of contacting this individual, and this went on for a long time. And we see these occasionally. We get these, I call them haunted houses, where no one's there.
The whole reason we have code enforcement, right? Is for
Right.
people that don't attend their house.
Exactly. And so in that particular case, I think it started as it was a rental. It was supposed to be a rental home, but couldn't find the owner, couldn't figure out how to contact anyone. And even whenever warrant letters sent to the actual
The file
address.
is full of certified letters that just got sent back because no one accepted them. But there was a renter at the house at the time. Now, he claims he's never received any of these notices, but it's kind of.
If I had a notice taped on my door and I was renting the house, I'd get a hold of the owner. Yeah,
And the renter is paying rent to someone.
right.
Okay, so as much as I hate what happened with this person, and it sounded like he had a really good argument until I started understanding exactly what we were dealing with, which was negligence. That's the way that I see it. He did not continue to pursue the problem. Instead, not my problem, it's their problem, and they could just deal with it. And I think he had no idea that Lynn was just letting the clock run the whole time on fine. It's a shame, but
And those lien letters were being sent certified too. So we can go through. The notifications were going.
So I guess, what is really the true amount that you pay? I mean, keeping your head in the sand doesn't get you out of jail, but I mean, I think he wants to move on, pay something. 15,000 is going to be a lot. Is council willing to move off of that?
what does he currently owe?
29, I thought it was.
29,000.
29, so we're offering him a half off deal.
What was the magistrate's number that he was told to pay?
I think the magistrate was just the hearing fee, which was 500 flat, and then it was at the time of the hearing, it was the rental registration rate, which was only 100. And then, or no, it was 300, and then the late fee was 100. So I think it was the 900.
I think that's right.
But it was
When
right
you-
around
So
you're
there.
that's
saying
the
that, that's-
absolute base. I mean, Can't go beneath that, that's legally mandated.
Time period to pay that.
And did this person even show up for that
He
hearing?
wasn't there.
Plus the pile of mail that they've, and the effort that Laura's put forth. You know, I believe he owes, I mean, I think that 50% discount's a nice deal for him.
It's actually the mother.
Or else he
right?
gets well, he likes to play it's his mother,
But
but
you see the
Who
problem.
owns the property? Is it the mother or is it him?
I don't know.
I thought it was the
I
mother.
believe it's in house.
Joint.
Can he pay what the magistrate said, and that's all? No, that's not an option for him.
No,
A
because he's
lien will
incurred all
go
these
away.
Right,
fines.
right.
He's incurred all these fees.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, this is
How do
not
you-
a small problem.
What's the amount to get the lien to go away? That's the bottom line.
That would be us accepting something.
50%, and that's been the gold standard we've used, and
Yeah.
everybody's been comfortable with that. I mean,
They're not happy, it still
50% of the
hurts.
magistrate or 50% of
Of the
all
fine.
escalated
50% of
costs?
everything.
I would say the 15,000 would be fair,
Yep.
just because of how long this has gone.
Right.
Yeah.
And the
Still,
time
it's
spent.
property here in this community and reaps the benefits of it.
Yeah, I mean, look at the house, it's right at the end of that cul-de-sac, it is fine real estate, that's worth much more than mine, I mean, we're talking probably 2 million,
I haven't even looked at it.
so it's not cheap.
And I want to bring up one other thing. He had that check where he gave a bank report that showed that he had a bank issue a check as a payment to the city for one of the rental registrations. The city has no record of receiving that check, and what Lynn told him was that he needed to see a show payment from his side of the bank that the check was deposited. So I double checked with Heather last week, and she said that she looked through everything again and said that payment never came in. So whatever happened to that payment, I don't know. We show a report that says the bank issued it, and it said, a landlord registration or something like that. But that was another piece that he provided. It was the 2 payments and that.
but
Lynn
we,
had seen it all before.
we followed that up with an overdue notice, though. I mean, I just recently dealt with a situation where, hey, my bank automatically issues checks, well, they never received it, but I'm still on the hook for it, so the question is, did we send out an overdue notice?
Oh, there were letters constantly going out
So, yeah,
on a regular basis.
we've done our part.
I think my only question was, does everyone want a timeline? You want Laura to put anything together so we have something we know for certain that we know the other side of the story when we make him a counteroffer, if you will, or an offer.
Well, I think that's what he's looking for. He wants to
Yeah.
say, give me a price, yes, yea or nay,
Yeah, and I think it
We'll
makes
need the
sense that we
timeline.
need the
Yeah,
timeline so we
I'm-
can speak educated. We get all these little tidbits and we don't know.
What's our
really.
side of the story?
Yeah, the background.
Exactly.
So just bullet
Yeah,
point
you
what
have
she's
enough
done.
information, But just
I
a
do.
quick email together, but here's what happened, and
Yeah.
here's the dates.
I've been talking with Laura about this, and she did say that she would put together a timeline. Because I said, when you're picking up these files, and it's just stacks of things, and there's papers.
As long as it doesn't, as long as we're not the ones that were creating the problem, okay? As long as we were doing our due diligence and we were following up and we were sending these letters, and we've got a nice little audit or a report showing when these things were sent, I think that satisfies my requirements, and I will gladly accept 50%.
Yeah, and all along the way, Lynn keeps these reports, so everything's going into these files. He writes on the side of the file any contact he's had with these people. I've been trying to work with him just to kind of put it all together, but yeah, that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, just 2 quick things based on bringing the code enforcement in-house versus the sheriff deputy. I think an unintended consequence, when I was talking with Laura about this, is that currently the sheriff deputy goes out and does his job. I'm sure he does a great job. I don't know what type of documentation, he writes the information down, and then he simply turns that over to Laura. It doesn't sound like it's a lot of data and or information, and then she's responsible for transposing that information to some type of a report. there's obviously an opportunity for some information and understanding to be lost by doing it that way with two different people. The second point I wanted to make was, I know you, not necessarily implying Laura, but you said just if it was done in-house, there may be an opportunity for somebody to say, well, that's my friend. You may know Laura a lot better than I do. I don't get a good gut feeling that she would give anybody a break out there, and that would be her job, because she's pretty tough cookie from what I feel. So I think she would be out there, and if somebody had a violation, they would be written up in the story. I almost feel like it might even be more the other way based on some of the discussions we've heard with the sheriff deputies about their approach in educating and things like that. I think in-house the person would be, hey, good afternoon, you're in violation, here's your ticket, good luck, pay it, I'm moving on.
Does anyone remember why we went to the sheriff's department?
I think the big argument at the time was because they thought a sheriff showing up at the door would make people be more responsive. And it made the presence of another deputy on the street. We had more visibility of a deputy on the street, even though we weren't paying for a deputy. So those were the two big arguments.
I had people actually tell me they would see the sheriff deputy and not answer the door.
Well, I've also seen an instance too where the sheriff stopped to question a contractor in a driveway,
Okay.
okay? And the contractor said, I don't need to talk to you. And the sheriff said, do we really want to go down this road? That was the end of the discussion. So that basically underscores my feeling about it's nice having a guy with a badge,
Right.
vote something about this thing.
Interesting.
At one point, we had an in-house marshal, and that didn't work out very well.
That was awful.
And
That was awful.
it was, we've gone through some iterations.
That's when that's when we had the big issue on here, with ESAs.
We've been through various iterations. And,
Interesting.
you got to ask the question, is it because the guy doesn't want to do the job right, or he doesn't have enough structure to what
Sure.
he's supposed to do? And we've never really solved that question, and I think we need to start with the structure. We need to provide more structure. This is your job, this is your duty.
You write the reports.
You write the reports, this is what you're responsible for, this is what you're responsible for at the end of the day, this is the product you're producing. And we can track how many complaints we got, and are we getting better or worse, or whatever. That's what we're missing. That's the missing piece of the puzzle. No matter which way we go, we can't tell if we're going to get better or worse.
Okay, any more discussion on that particular topic? If not, I want to move on right quick. We have, the next budget meeting is Monday. Will Lynn be attending that meeting? Not by phone, not by anything.
Request.
I would like to request Lynn Reeves, does the rest of the council agree with that? For
Yes.
Lynn to attend by Zoom on Monday, during Monday's meeting?
Agree.
Because
Yes.
there are things in this budget that I'm sure you know a lot about, and I'm sure that there's some of them that he has in his head that you don't know anything about. I'm not challenging you, but I'm just saying that there's some things that he probably could just give you an answer real quick, where you may have to do some catching up. Is that a fair statement?
Well, if you give me a little heads up, I can find those answers for you ahead of time. So if you reach out to him, I don't know if he's available, but we do have that contract with him, so.
Okay. I would feel better if you were both here during that meeting, and then that way, between the two of you, any questions we have about budget items, one of you should be able to answer the question. Does everybody else feel okay with that?
Does he need to be physically here?
No,
Does he-
we should
Okay.
say fine by Zoom. I just, we only have 2 more of these scheduled. We can have more, but the more information we get, the faster we can move on to other things. See what you can do, and also, we're planning on giving Lynn a service award. And so I would also like to know, is he going to be in town during any of our council meetings, the regular council meetings, so we can present that award? So, did you hear that, Dave?
Yes.
Okay, great.
You mean that trophy didn't count?
What's that?
That trophy?
No, that
doesn't
trophy
count?
didn't count. The next thing is, we are narrowing down candidates for city manager. I'm not going to say anything, so you can stay right here. Tentatively, we had it on the calendar to begin Zoom interviews on Tuesday. Does everybody feel good about that? And Patty, do you think that you can line that up where, how many minutes do we want to give to each candidate? And if it requires too much time, are you okay with continuing the conversations on Wednesday? So we already have a budget on Monday. We have interim, not interim, but a tentative millage rate immediately following that. And Tuesday, I would like to do Zoom interviews. That's what I had on the calendar. And Wednesday was kind of reserved if we didn't have enough time to interview the various candidates. This portion of the process is to reduce the number from, I think we have 6 right now, maybe 5. Could it be even 4? What do we, right now we're 4 for sure. And there's 2 that we're waiting.
So we had
on.
7, right? How many are out?
3 for sure. 1 I haven't heard from, that I had sent an application that I was in constant contact with me.
So there's 2 that are for sure not, one has not reached back to you at all, and the other one said, I'm not interested.
Right.
Okay, all right. So we're looking at 5 right now, but we haven't heard back from 2
Right.
out of those 5. So do we give them more time, or do we just keep reaching out to them, and if they don't contact us back, then we start with those 3?
Continue reaching out since they're just phone calls,
Yeah.
just a daily phone call.
Okay. All right, so in this case, whoever is available on Tuesday will be the first round of Zoom interviews, and then we will continue on if you can get in touch with more. And we'll see how it goes. We're kind of having to play it by ear because everybody has lives. And it's hard to get everybody on the same page, but the way I envision this is we assign time slots to each candidate. They receive their own Zoom number so that the other candidates can log in and listen and watch. And then whenever that time slot goes up, the next one comes right in. And we do, I think, in 20 minutes each candidate, just to kind of have some questions for them.
So this was just to reduce it down to a short
Just
list.
to reduce the number.
Okay, so gut feel, time to think, personality. Okay.
Ask them some questions
Right.
and just see how they, I guess, the feeling that we have for each candidate.
Because the next step following that would be, once we've called it down, then it goes to the actual interviews.
Eventually, I want to have it down to 2 candidates and that we've selected, and then we call them in for in-person interviews and then vote.
What time are you thinking that this will happen? I have board
On
meetings on
Tuesday's meeting, I'm thinking we'll try to start at 6, just like this. We can do earlier if you'd like.
Yeah, I have a board meeting, I believe it starts at 6. I have to double check. I don't know if it's a 5 o'clock or a 6, but I mean, and then I'm committed. I didn't realize we were gonna have all these meetings that week. I have an all week long commitment daytime, so it's really killing me.
I'm sorry, I have it on the hiring calendar, but we haven't actually called the meeting yet because we were waiting to make sure we actually
Had candidates, I understand, yeah. I mean, I'll do my best to get there, but yeah.
5 is okay for me.
What's that?
5 o'clock's okay for
Five.
me.
Yeah, I'll try to do 5, I'm not sure, but
Well, which one's more comfortable for you?
5 would be, if I can do anything, it would be 5. And it's gonna be in the car, in the parking lot at my other meeting, so, you know, kind of thing. So I'm not gonna have a real, yeah, great Zoom access, but we'll make it work.
Okay.
So Tuesday the 19th is at 5 now?
Yes. Does that work for you?
I'm at your beck and call, Mayor.
I'd rather not, I'd rather do a Wednesday than a Tuesday, but I know 5 o'clock is okay.
Is Tuesday too hectic for everyone? Just throwing it out there because we can always push it to Wednesday.
Wednesday's okay for
What's that?
me. Wednesday's no good for me.
Well, let's just do a show of hands. Who prefers Tuesday?
I can meet you Tuesday.
One,
I mean,
two, three,
I can
four,
squeeze it.
five.
I'm
Sorry,
gonna try my
that's-
best.
All right,
I
so
can do
Tuesday
this.
is 5 p.m. And Patty, as soon as you, I want you to reach out to the candidates, the ones that you've already contacted. If you've received 3 applications back so far, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I would like all the council members to receive those applications.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not getting information till last minute is really tough too. I need it things, as soon as we have it would be helpful.
Yes. Yes, Mr. Roberts.
I just have one more question for Patty. So how many of the 7 are definitely out? I know one person said they already had another job.
Okay.
Right? So just ones are definitely out.
All right.
How many?
Only one so
Here
far.
we go. Here's her
2,
email.
no,
2. I got it.
2.
2 are definitely out.
Right, 1 declined and the other one, no response. I can't get a response from them.
Okay,
That's
so-
not a definitive, I'm not interested, that's just a no response.
Yeah, but that's multiple attempts, right?
Yeah.
Voicemails
multiple
and
attempts.
email.
So we're probably down to 5. Best case scenario. Right, we started with 7, 2 out, we're down to 5. At a best case scenario.
Well, if we get them all back.
Right,
Yep.
right, okay,
As it stands right now, we have 3 applications.
right. Okay,
Okay, so what I'm going to do is just everyone go ahead and plan for Tuesday. I'm going to wait and see what we get between now and then, and Patty will let me know if they're even available for scheduling on Tuesday for a Zoom call. And then we'll send out the emergency meeting on, not emergency, special meeting on Friday to shore everything up. All right, and the only other thing, one of the things that I want to make sure that we can do on the tentative millage rate is, obviously, we want to leave ourselves some flexibility. Just knowing with the way property values have gone up, what's everyone's thoughts on the possibility of eventually going to a rollback rate with the way that our property values and taxes are right now?
I put that at the lane, when we discussed the budget. And he said if we go back to the rollback rate, and we are fixed with that one rollback rate, money coming, but if we just raise it even like $1 mil, then we can collect that additional fund. So rather than just go all the way back to rollback, I thought we just split the rate.
So, now I'm not talking about our tentative. I'm just talking about, I'm talking about at the end of the cycle, whenever we vote for that. I'm just wondering, has anyone looked deep enough into this to see if there's flexibility to even consider a rollback rate this year? Vice Mayor?
You know, if you look under the assumptions in this strategic plan, page 12, I expanded some thoughts on property values will generally increase. The problem with rollbacks are, in my mind, twofold. One is, if you do a rollback, it's always going to be out of sync with the economy. You're always going to be playing catch up. You might roll it back now, but then guess what? Things change. The truth changes again, and it's by the time you catch up, you're a year out of phase with this stuff. And then the second thing is, if you're doing it because, hey, you want to roll back and whatever, my thinking is how are those residents going to feel when the truth changes again, and you got to turn around and increase the millage rate? They're going to remember that one more than they're going to remember the rollback.
The only reason why I'm bringing it up is because this is the biggest one. This is the biggest tax hit we've taken in a long time, and we're not changing the millage rate. But also, I'm looking at inflation and cost of fuel, cost of goods and services, cost of health care. It's everything is going haywire right now. But I'm just, just thinking about it. This is something that I want all of you to consider as we move forward. If we may stumble on things that we can cut back on that might make it possible, but just things to consider.
If we're talking about cutting the budget 5%, then why can't we go back to 3%? I understand, like, look, I'm retired, I see inflation, just grab it and that's what.
Because nobody's rolling back our expenditures. That's the issue. Is, yeah, we can roll back our revenues. One question that was never answered was whether or not we can do a partial rollback. Was that nixed?
Well, that's what I just was saying, split debate,
Yeah, well, I don't think that question was ever answered, number one. Number two is, again, we can roll back our revenues, but nothing's rolling back on our expenditures.
Well, yeah, but as the mayor explained, with the biggest tax increase that we're going to be getting, if
But-
we roll back the rate halfway, does that not give us more than enough revenue?
It may be possible, but at the same time, you see what happened with one construction project. Completely way out there. And this is what I'm seeing everywhere. It's not just with that one project, it's everything. I can't believe it. Some of the services that we pay for it were 40% increase in 1 year. I don't even know how you justify that, but I guess because everybody else is justifying it,
Look at flood insurance is going up through the roof. Wind insurance, homeowners again. I think if we have, look, I agree with you. The citizens only thank you for what you did yesterday. Tomorrow's a new day. But if you can save them a couple bucks, I always think the citizens know how to spend their money better than we do. But look, there ain't going to be no thank yous when you have to increase.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you there.
Memories are short.
Yeah.
So, Dave, and your concern is the percentage change of the 12.8%. Is that what you're concerned about, the assessed taxable value?
right.
And I'm going to assume that most of our voting residents are homestead exempt.
They should be if they're not.
Right. So a lot of that increase in value is probably coming from home sales and new construction, because we have a 10% cap
Right.
for anything that is, even if they're not homestead exempt. So I think you may be overthinking that it's affecting our residents. It's really probably not as much. There have been a lot of houses that have traded, a lot of big sales in Bel Air Beach this past year, and I bet you'll find that's new construction and home sales more than it is existing residents.
Okay.
I think that something that we could actually see in black and white, and it's not that difficult to do. So the maximum increase of the assessed value is 3%, right?
Yeah, the maximum.
For homestead.
Most they can 3%. So if we do the math and say, okay, if we keep the current millage rate, and you go up 3%, that's going to bring it from X to Y. That's an increase of Z. Versus if we roll it back, it's going to increase it from X to Y or A to B and C. What's the delta in that? My guess right now, I'm telling you, that's going to be almost minuscule compared to the total amount of your tax.
Yes, that's true.
So we educate the people and say, don't go crazy over this rollback thing because it's only going to be another, I don't know, pick it up, $47.23.
You'll
That's
see it
what
when you
we
get
went
the
through in the
numbers.
election, whenever you showed it to somebody,
Yeah.
what the difference was. But I'm only bringing it up.
No, no,
It was
no.
such a hot topic.
But if you
last year.
multiply that times all the residents here, that could really help us as a city. We're talking about, we need more revenue to do things that the citizens want. This is an opportunity where we're going to get more revenue because of the multiplier of 1,600 houses that we have here in the city. So that's a good thing, I think.
And then, last thing, and I'll let everybody go. The fire chief came and he talked to us, and he's proposing a .067.
Yeah, was it .0
It was
or
small.
.6?
I thought it was .67. It may have been 6.
I don't think it's .0, I think
Right,
it's, I thought it was
0.67%
Yeah.
of a millage rate. So
Oh,
it's really
yeah,
important.
Mil,
I'm sorry, I'm thinking
0.67 mil.
Yeah,
Yeah,
So
per
it
thousand.
sounds like a lot of money, and it is, whenever you are not paying it. What's your idea on the solution? I don't want the county to come in and hit us with a 2.5 millage rate. I don't want to see that. I mean, that would double our taxes for Bel Air Beach. It didn't seem too extreme to me, but I think someone brought up another assessment. Do you do that every year?
the problem with it is they've already written the language. We know what that means to get that on the ballot. They've got the language written. That's all they're going with. There's no changing it. They've already decided that's what they want, and that's how they're going to the ballot. Because they've got to provide that, in August, I think it is?
Yeah, they had to hurry up and get it out
Yeah,
there just
yeah.
to show up on the ballot.
So I don't think any of that's negotiable. That's what they're coming, and I was gonna go sit down and talk to them because I know what they need. I mean, he had a good point. We need the services. They need new equipment. They need buildings, that sort of thing. But I want to get a better idea of how is it going to affect our residents as far as costs go and that sort of thing across the board.
I still have a little frustration with this ad valorem issue. I mean, I can't get it out of my head that a flat service fee is more equitable because the response is the same. He's going to say, okay, well, you big guys, we're going to have 3 fire trucks there instead of 1. Well, when was the last time one of those responses took place here? I'm speaking out of ignorance there. I don't know. To me, the vast majority response is going to be an EMS ambulance. So to me, it's a very, very equitable, except for maybe a 0.5% or whatever that percent of the time is where they respond to a fire. 99.95% of the time it's going to be an EMS response, and the playing field is level as far as I'm concerned. Whether you live on 6th Street or you live on Harbor Drive. That's
Well, I think what he tried to explain, what I heard, was that he was trying to make a comparison between condos and homes. And the condos was a big difference based on the amount of time that they spend there, if there's a fire and tearing it down and all that kind of stuff. So it sounded like it wasn't the same, what I heard, versus in my head, when I was thinking about stormwater, that is the same. That's underground. Everybody who lives on a street is benefiting from it.
His example was a mobile home and a 6,000 square foot house. And I said
He
that
did mention
wasn't a
mobile
good
home.
comparison.
That's right. I agree.
Because if you have a 6,000 square foot home or a condo where the condo
Right.
back is on fire, there's a whole lot of more time and a lot more people to deal with in a condo versus a single-family residence. And so
It was
his
different.
example was bad.
Yeah,
And-
I concur.
Or can creatively be chosen.
It was, yeah, the way I proposed, the example I used, he would spend more time at the condo than he would your house. You know what I'm saying? Single-family home, so.
You know, the other experience with fees, if it's like the assessments, is it's a rigorous process you go through. It's not just like every address gets charged a certain amount. There's some hoops you have to jump through because you have to show equitable services and also a justifiable distribution. I mean, that's how assessments are done. It's not just, hey, you live at this address, you live at that address. You have to prove those things with how you determine that fee. And I think we went through
Yeah, we had a
those hoops
lady
there,
do that.
Olive Miller and whoever.
But does everybody, I haven't even looked at it, does everybody pay the same fee?
They do
I
right,
just-
they do right now.
Single-family residents versus condos pay different fees.
But all the single families, regardless if it's a
Yes. Yeah, they
$18
all pay
million
the same.
house or a $300,000
Right.
house,
Yeah.
same fee.
Exactly the same.
Yeah, so, you know, I could see some people arguing with that and saying, well, why am I paying more? You know, it's just a stormwater pipe that's in the ground.
I can tell you this,
So,
if they
it's
wind
never
up
gonna be
folding,
happy.
if they wind up folding and the county swoops in and takes it all over, those big homes are getting one hell of a tax increase.
I agree. That's why we have to do a good job, I think. If that thing is going to be on the ballot, we need to help them understand, the citizens understand this, so that they're not surprised at the
People that are
end.
gonna have the biggest problem with this, I don't know, there's probably people in this room right now that have a problem with it. But you look at Bel Air Shore, they're asking for a millage rate that Bel Air Shore is currently paying for their hometown.
Right.
So their local taxes double effectively for living in Bel Air Shore. Now, they do live in Bel Air Shore, but my point is that's where you're going to have a big selling
Same with us,
problem.
yeah.
Is you're not paying any taxes, and now you're expected to double it for something that you're already getting now at this set price.
How many towns did he support?
It's, Indian Shores, Indian Rocks, Bel Air Beach, Bel Air Shore, and.
And the, no, it's just over the bridge.
Unincorporated Seminole.
Yeah, it's right, just over the bridge, over Indian Rocks Bridge,
It's
there's that
unincorporated Seminole.
Oakhurst area, they
Okay.
call it.
Yeah. All right, well, that's it.
I have
Oh,
something
yeah,
else.
go ahead.
Go ahead, Glenn.
I just had two more budget issues. One is a little more description or on car allowances.
Yeah, I had a question about that. too.
And also to get our arms around this concept of placeholders. I mean, how much are we're putting things in the budget where we know realistically we're not going to spend it all or whatever. And I'm just wondering.
And car allowance is taxable, and mileage is not. So something to look into just to make sure that we're doing it right. I'm sure our accountants are all over it, but I'll bring that up.
Well, it was like, I have no clue because I didn't study that well. How many of these we have, car allowances, why, justification. And then the one I did flag was, I think, a 9% increase in the car allowances.
Yeah.
Where'd that come from?
That's
Why?
what brought up the leased car, perhaps.
I don't know. At what point do you use a city car?
All right.
City fire truck.
Everyone look at the Shirley guys.
Okay,
I did
then
that.
just, I know we kind of brushed this over, that Kyle's working on undergrounding Gulf Boulevard, the Gulf Boulevard utilities. I recall that I had asked about, do we have a bid for the north of the light, the rest of the project? because we have some limitations, and the reason I'll tell you that I'm asking, we have X number of funds, and we can't do the entire golf boulevard at once. And so we automatically go to the cheaper option, south of the light. It might make sense to look at doing north of the light and get the most bang for our buck, and get it done before prices continue to increase, because it's the bigger project, to save money in the end.
You know what, copper is so expensive right now, that's your biggest cost in this. I think copper is going to drop. I think precious metals are going to drop in another year. I think it would be foolish to put that money out right now, at least.
We have to spend it, though. We have
Yeah,
to
we
use
have
it.
to use it, don't we?
So I can lay out the numbers for you, and
Yeah,
There's
that-
some costs that aren't, I could make copies and hand it out right now if you want. I did prepare the numbers.
if you're
Whatever you're-
looking for total cost of the two phases, you got two main contractors, one's the utility company, one is the ones that do the conduit. So phase one total cost at this point, which is actually been verified, and we have the contracts for them. So that is $2,001,083.59 for all phase one, that's including Duke and conduit. Phase two, the total is going to be $3,200,474.50. So you're looking at about another $1,200,000.
Most of it's material, right?
So your main changing cost, the utility consultants of Florida, they're the ones that did the underground at BEI. They are offering the same prices as BEI. They signed a contract with Indian Rocks Beach that is good until August 10th, 2025 with extensions. I think it's up to 3-2-year extension. So that's not changing at all. When you look at the Duke Energy costs, we're locked in with that rate they gave us, the $2 million, roughly $2 million. It's a binding cost estimate. That's only 180 days, so that's only good until December 8th, 2022. So,
And you remember the last time we dealt with Duke, we let it lapse. They gave us the next quote, and it was astronomical compared to what they
Yeah.
originally quoted us.
And how much of that money do we currently have based on that special
So,
program?
starting this budget, 2023 budget, we'll have $2,263,724. And then each of the following week, for 2 more years, we get the $930,400. That's how they broke it up. So the total available budget, by the time we collect all of our penny money, we'll have $4,123,574.
So that's, the 2.2 is just the penny money. And then we have the money we took from the storm that we're not using from storm because we have those funds that came in from the federal government. How much is that? 700?
that was, I believe, 800 for the rescue.
So back to
So,
my
yeah.
point, we end up with enough to do the north end of the city today. If we add the 800 from the rest
So
of
right now, the deficit of what our penny money is, if you just took our penny for money, we're at a deficit of $1,077,980.
for both
For
projects.
both projects?
For both projects.
So is that something we could actually try to borrow that money, like from a bank, going back
Or
to
use
the
the
bank?
hurricane.
Or
Or
use the
somewhere,
hurricane.
get it from somewhere.
Well, yeah, because that we'll get the rest of it, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, so as it comes in, we put it right back in. That may be a smarter thing.
but we should sign the contract. It sounds like to me, rather, we can't let it lapse, let's just,
Just do
But
it
these
all.
are kind of things that we gotta really
Right.
kind of all meet together and talk about, right? So that's something to try to focus on if we're looking at these capital improvements and trying to get the projects done.
and that includes hiring the gentleman and his firm that's doing the work for Indian Rocks Beach as well. That's turnkey, that's everything. The numbers you just gave us.
I have those. if you want.
So that would be beneficial, it's not an emergency, but something like a one-pager that would show us the phase 1, phase 2, and then the revenue that's coming in from the other sources, and what other options we need to consider to make it work.
And the options you're talking about are, we got the
hurricane option.
got the hurricane that we could lower. We got the balance of the rescue money coming in that's getting allocated towards stormwater, and then using the rest of the unallocated reserves.
Okay,
for
yeah.
loans. So-
Or we could just borrow from you.
Yeah.
Have we heard anything on the grant for the generator?
I have not. There was another request for information from the state, and I provided that, and I think that was about, I want to say 2 weeks ago exactly. So they're still working on it. They just wanted to double check the budgetary numbers and then just have a recalculation, because I think they asked for the operation costs, and I interpreted it as to generator only, and they wanted the complete operation cost of running the EOC out of this building, so that recalculated.
So if we don't get that grant, is that competing money for this undergrounding?
If you get the grant, you'll save on budgeted money that, either way, next budget year, we have the money to buy the generator. If you get the grant, then you're saving that 75%.
Anyone else before I end this meeting? All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Do I have a second?
Second.
Leslie Navarro. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Have a good night.